The Benton County Courthouse still creaked like it carried the weight of every decision ever made within its walls. Morning sunlight cut through tall, narrow windows, catching in the dust and dancing across the polished oak benches. The air smelled faintly of old paper, varnish, and something unspoken. Maybe regret. In the last row, almost invisible, sat a woman in a muted green coat and plain black skirt. Her name wasn't listed on any docket. No one had called her as a witness. But she was here, seated with a kind of stillness that commanded attention more than noise ever could. Her name was Evelyn Hart, 61, hair streaked with gray but swept back neatly, dark skin against the soft olive of her coat. Her fingers were folded neatly in her lap, resting on a worn handbag that had seen better years. She didn't check her phone, didn't look around nervously like the others. She was watching only one person, the young man seated at the defendant's table. Jonas Reddick, 27, lean frame in an oversized, court-assigned dress shirt. He didn't look back, not once. Not even when Evelyn walked in 40 minutes earlier. His eyes were fixed ahead, jaw set like stone. But Evelyn saw every twitch, every shoulder drop, every clenched jaw muscle. Judge Harmon Blythe adjusted his glasses, eyeing Jonas from the bench with practiced detachment. "Mr. Reddick," he began, flipping through papers with the slow precision of someone who knew how much weight his words carried. "You've rejected the plea offer. As such, we move forward." Evelyn didn't flinch. She had heard worse. She had sat in far colder rooms, but the courtroom air carried a unique kind of chill, the kind that came from silence between two people who once shared something resembling love. Her hand brushed against the edge of something in her bag, a photograph, curled edges, creased in the center. She didn't take it out, she didn't need to. Jonas hadn't looked at her yet. Maybe he hadn't recognized her. Or maybe he had. Maybe that was why his fingers kept drumming lightly against his pant leg beneath the table. Evelyn knew that rhythm. She had once tapped the same beat onto his back to lull him to sleep. The attorneys traded statements, dry words, legal jargon. Exhibits were entered into record. One of the bailiffs stifled a yawn. Evelyn remained still. She hadn't introduced herself at the checkpoint, just handed over her ID and said, "I'm here for him." No one asked who him was, but Evelyn knew, had always known. From across the courtroom, Jonas shifted in his seat. For a split second, his gaze drifted, just slightly, toward the back. Their eyes didn't meet. But Evelyn felt it. That subtle magnetic pull between two souls who once survived something together. It had been 16 years since they last stood in the same room. Back then, the house on Lyndale Street had been full of noise. Kids slamming doors, cereal bowls clinking, cartoons humming in the background. Evelyn's foster home had been unofficial but full of structure. Curfews, chores, weekly movie nights. No raised voices, just a slow insistence on kindness. Jonas arrived at 11, skin and bones. Quiet. The caseworker warned her, "He doesn't trust adults." Don't expect much. Evelyn hadn't. She made chili the first night and left an extra quilt folded at the foot of the guest bed. He didn't eat with her. Didn't say thank you. But that night she found a crumpled napkin in the trash with "good food" scribbled on it. That was how it began. Jonas was different from the other kids. He never called her Miss Evelyn, never asked for seconds, even when his plate was spotless. He hoarded food in his pillowcase and flinched whenever the front door slammed too hard. At night, he curled up under the blanket but never closed his eyes until hours later. Evelyn would pass by his door, listening to the soft rustle of sheets and his barely audible breathing. A child surviving like the war was still going on. She never pushed, Instead, she hummed, soft gospel melodies she'd learned from her grandmother, while folding laundry or stirring soup. On the third week, she found him standing silently in the kitchen one morning, watching her fry eggs. "You don't talk much, do you?" she said gently. He shrugged. "You want syrup on your toast or just butter?" Another shrug, but he sat down, ate slowly, and when she turned to pour coffee, she caught the tiniest smile curling at the edge of his mouth. By month 2, he was leaving little notes for her. "I took out the trash. We're out of cereal. You snore." He never said much aloud, but his presence began to soften. He'd sit on the porch steps while she gardened, sometimes just watching the ants crawl through the dirt. One time, after a storm knocked the power out, he lit a candle and placed it outside her bedroom door without a word. On his 12th birthday, she handed him a small wrapped box. Inside was a hoodie, navy blue, soft, and stitched with his initials near the hem. His voice cracked when he said, "Thank you." It was the first time she'd heard him speak a full sentence, but it didn't last. A letter arrived 2 months later. A relative in another state had filed for custody. One who had never met him, hadn't called, hadn't cared until now. The agency called it a reunification opportunity. Evelyn called it a mistake. She filed an appeal. Lost. The last morning, Jonas wouldn't look at her. His backpack was already zipped when she walked into the living room. "I'll write," she said quietly. He didn't answer. He stood by the door with the caseworker, holding the hoodie she'd given him like it was the only thing keeping him from unraveling. Then he left. Evelyn waited. Weeks turned to months. No letter came. She checked the mailbox anyway, every day, and now, 16 years later, he sat in a courtroom, his shoulders slightly hunched like they had been when he first arrived at her door. He wore a dress shirt too big and shoes too tight, but the same storm lived behind his eyes. The prosecution laid out his record: petty thefts, probation violations, a string of minor arrests that hinted at deeper cracks. But this time was different. This time, there had been a confrontation. An officer shoved, a window broken. It was messy and public. Jonas stared straight ahead, face blank. The defense attorney whispered to him. He nodded slightly, hands still clasped. Evelyn didn't need to know the charges in detail. She wasn't here to debate his innocence. She was here because no one else was. The recess bell rang. Judge Blythe rose, announcing a 20-minute break. The lawyers dispersed. Whispered conversations rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn remained in her seat. A woman in a beige blouse leaned over to her friend a few rows ahead. "Is she his grandmother?" she whispered not so quietly. "I thought he didn't have any family," the other replied, half turning to get a better look. Evelyn's gaze stayed forward. Then came the sound of heels against tile, measured, professional. A young woman in a slate-gray suit approached, badge clipped to her lapel. She bent down slightly, voice polite but edged with assumption. "Ma'am, are you in the right courtroom?" Evelyn turned her head slowly. Her expression was calm, not cold. Her voice was low, steady. "Yes," she said. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The woman blinked, taken aback. I just meant this is a criminal trial. Sometimes folks mix up rooms." "I'm not lost," Evelyn said, softer this time, but with finality. The woman nodded, murmured an apology, and stepped away. Across the courtroom, Jonas shifted in his seat. For the briefest moment, his eyes flicked toward the gallery. Evelyn didn't wave, didn't smile. Just looked at him, fully, plainly. And for the first time, he didn't look away. The courtroom filled again, slowly, like water returning to a still pond. A murmur passed through the pews as the judge re-entered. His gavel struck once, sharp and clear. "The court is back in session," Judge Blythe announced. Jonas didn't move at first. His attorney whispered something to him again, this time more firmly. The judge adjusted his spectacles and looked directly at the defendant. "Mr. Reddick, you have the right to speak before sentencing is issued. Do you wish to make a statement?" There was a pause, long enough for someone to shift in their seat. A cough came from the far right bench, then Jonas stood. The room quieted. He looked awkward, stiff. He hadn't prepared anything. His fingers fidgeted slightly like they had a mind of their own. He looked down at the table, then up at the judge, but only for a moment. His eyes moved beyond the bench to the gallery and landed on her. "I don't have a lot of words," Jonas began, voice uneven. "I never really did." He swallowed hard. "Most of the time when I talk, people stop listening halfway through, so I got used to just keeping quiet." He paused, glancing down. Then he lifted his eyes again, this time right at Evelyn. "But when I was a kid, there was this house," he said slowly. "It smelled like fresh bread and pine cleaner. The lady who ran it, she didn't say much either. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She just made sure I had clean socks and pancakes on Saturdays." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The bailiff stood a little straighter. Jonas's voice grew softer, but clearer. "I called her Miss E, only in my head. Never said it out loud. I thought, maybe if I did, it'd make her real, and then they'd take her away too." He took a deep breath. "But she was real. And when they moved me, I didn't say goodbye. I thought she didn't fight, that she didn't want me back." Across the courtroom, Evelyn's posture didn't change, but her eyes glistened. "I was wrong," Jonas said. "I know that now. I know what she did, what she tried to do." His voice cracked. "She made me believe I was someone worth holding on to, even if I didn't believe it myself." A murmur swept through the courtroom, not loud but undeniable. Jonas looked at Evelyn again, this time without hesitation. "If she still wants to be part of my life, I'd like that. I don't got much else left, but I'd like to have that again." He sat down quickly, face flushed, shoulders tense. No one spoke for a beat. Even Judge Blythe blinked, eyebrows raised, as if he too had been caught off guard by the shift in tone, by the weight of what had just been shared. Then he cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Reddick." His gaze drifted uncharacteristically toward Evelyn. "Miss Hart," the judge said slowly, not reading from any notes. "Is that correct?" Evelyn sat up a little straighter. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge nodded, thoughtfully. "You used to work at Glenbrook Elementary, didn't you?" "I did," she said quietly. "I thought I recognized you," the judge replied, a small, rare smile breaking across his stern features. "My nephew had trouble reading until second grade. Said a Miss Hart taught him with picture books about dinosaurs." A few surprised chuckles rose from the gallery. "He still talks about you," the judge said, voice softening. Evelyn dipped her head. "He was a bright boy." The judge leaned back, gaze sweeping the courtroom. His tone changed, no longer purely legal, but personal. "This courtroom sees a lot of pain, a lot of regret, but it's not every day we see someone reach back across the years to admit they needed something they lost." He paused. "And it's even rarer to see that something, or someone, still sitting there, waiting." Judge Blythe took a moment, eyes lowered to his notes, though it was clear his mind had already wandered far beyond the printed pages. "We often speak of justice in terms of punishment," he said slowly. "But sometimes justice is also about recognition. about remembering the people who step in where others failed. He looked back toward Evelyn. "You didn't come here today to speak, Miss Hart, but you have, loudly." Evelyn blinked, but remained composed. The judge turned his attention back to Jonas. "Mr. Reddick, your record reflects pain, yes, but it also reflects resilience. And today, what you said, it tells me there's still something in you worth protecting." Jonas didn't move, but his throat worked as he swallowed hard. Judge Blythe continued, "This court has reviewed your violations, your missed appointments. The consequences of your choices are not erased by apology, but they are contextualized." He leaned forward, hands folded. "In light of your statement and of the testimony, not formal but deeply human, offered today by Miss Hart, I am choosing an alternative to incarceration." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Jonas's attorney shifted, eyes wide. "You will enter a 6-month structured rehabilitation program," the judge said clearly. "You will complete 200 hours of community service, preferably in mentorship roles." He paused. Sometimes the best way to heal is by helping someone else heal. Jonas exhaled slowly, like air had finally found its way back into his lungs. Judge Blythe looked at Evelyn again. "And Miss Hart, this court acknowledges something rarely said out loud, the impact of quiet love, of care given when no one is watching. You may not have been sworn in today, but let the record reflect that your influence is on the record now." Evelyn's lips parted slightly. Her hands, still resting on her handbag, trembled just once. A single tear traced down her cheek. Judge Blythe struck the gavel lightly. Sentencing complete. No one moved. Even as the judge rose and stepped through the side door, the courtroom remained still, as if no one wanted to disturb what had just happened. Jonas turned slightly in his seat. His eyes met Evelyn's. This time, not in fear or guilt or distance, just recognition, and something else. Something reaching across years, across silence. She gave him a slight nod, not a smile, not yet, just a nod, steady and warm. He returned it, barely. And for the first time in years, the space between them no longer felt so far. The soft groan of wooden benches signaled movement at last. People began to rise, gathering their bags, whispering about what had just transpired. But no one looked at Evelyn quite the same anymore. The woman who'd sat in seat 9, silent and still, was now more than background. She was the story. Jonas didn't rush out. He stood slowly, his fingers brushing the edges of the defense table. His attorney whispered something again, probably reminding him to check in with the clerk or sign paperwork, but Jonas barely responded. Evelyn remained in her seat. She didn't need to follow him, not yet. Let him come. Outside, the sun had risen higher, casting bright angles through the courthouse windows. Light fell over the dusty floor, catching the shimmer of her tear-streaked face. Jonas hesitated at the threshold. Then he turned. He didn't walk directly to her, just stood across the aisle, close enough that the distance could be closed if either of them chose to. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. His voice was low, uncertain. Evelyn looked at him, not through him, not past him, but right at him. "You didn't need to think it," she replied. "I was always going to." He shifted his weight, as if trying to find something to do with his hands. He settled on letting them hang, awkward and honest. "I didn't know if I deserved it." Evelyn's gaze softened. "Deserve's a funny word. Most people use it to keep love away from themselves." He exhaled sharply through his nose, a near laugh, almost a wince. "You always talk like that?" "No," she said. "Only when I mean it." They stood in silence, the courtroom nearly empty now. "I used to think—" Jonas began, then stopped. When they took me. I thought maybe you hadn't wanted me to stay. Evelyn didn't flinch, but her voice grew quieter. I fought. He looked up at her sharply. I wrote letters, made calls, but they said I wasn't kin, said I'd had my turn. Jonas bit his lower lip. She reached into her bag, pulled out the worn photo. The one with curled edges, the one she'd touched every day since he left. She held it out to him. He took it. It was him, standing next to her faded hydrangea bush, wearing the hoodie she'd given him. His arm was slung around her waist, hesitant but proud. I didn't forget, she said. He stared at the picture, jaw clenched, breath shaky. I thought I was just one of a dozen kids, he whispered. You were, Evelyn said gently, but you were also mine. That word, mine, seemed to shake something loose in him. He nodded once, then again. And though they didn't hug, didn't touch, didn't rush to close the space between them, something invisible began to mend. A thread pulled tight across time, now softening. Jonas turned toward the door. Evelyn stood up. Without a word, he waited. She walked beside him, step for step, out the courthouse doors and into the light. 2 years passed. Evelyn didn't mark them by holidays or birthdays, but by phone calls. Letters, texts that started clumsy and short. You up? Or, you remember that pancake recipe? But gradually turned into real conversations. Jonas had entered the mentorship program, worked at a youth center 3 afternoons a week, helped kids with homework, took them on field trips, stayed late when one of them needed to talk. And every month he visited. Not always on time, not always with much to say, but he came. And Evelyn, always patient, never measured the distance by how fast he returned. Only that he did. Now, she stood in the corner of a modest community center strung with warm lights and filled with the low hum of laughter and clinking dishes. It was the city's annual foster care benefit gala. Nothing grand, folding chairs and casserole trays, but it pulsed with something real. Hope. She wore a dark blue dress, her silver curls pinned neatly, a pair of sensible shoes, and the same gold watch that hadn't ticked in years. Her hands rested on a soft leather clutch. Her eyes, however, were fixed forward. Jonas stood at the microphone. He looked different now, shoulders squared, chin lifted, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal a faint tattoo he used to hide. His voice was confident but sincere, the kind of voice that hadn't been trained, only lived. I don't usually speak at things like this, he began, prompting a few chuckles from the audience. But I guess they figured if I could talk my way out of a prison sentence, I could talk my way through a fundraiser. More laughter. Then silence as he looked out over the crowd. I was in the system for years, Jonas continued. I bounced around a lot, learned how to pack a bag in under a minute, learned not to ask for seconds, learned how to disappear. Evelyn stood completely still, but there was one house where I didn't feel invisible. His voice dropped slightly. One woman, she didn't push, didn't pry, just made space, and pancakes. He glanced to the side of the stage where Evelyn stood, watching. She didn't have much, but what she gave me lasted longer than anything else I've ever had. She didn't wear a cape. She didn't save me in one big moment. She just stayed, even when they took me away. He paused, swallowed. I didn't know what love was. I didn't know it could survive the silence, but she did. She waited. And when I came back, she didn't ask for an apology. She just handed me a photo and made breakfast. Evelyn felt her chest rise sharply. She's here tonight, Jonas said, voice catching. And if you want to know the real reason I'm alive, it's her. He turned toward her now, lifting his hand in gesture. She's not just my foster mom, she's my mother." The room erupted in applause. But Evelyn didn't move at first, not out of shock, but because her heart, for once, was too full to step forward. Later that night, when the gala faded and guests trickled out beneath a soft spring moon, Evelyn returned home. Her house hadn't changed much. Still modest. Still painted in the same pale taupe Jonas once called gravy-colored. The porch light buzzed faintly. The hydrangeas along the walkway were just beginning to bloom again. Inside, she placed her clutch gently on the hallway table, removed her shoes, turned off the lamp. Then, without hesitation, she walked toward the old wooden desk in the corner of the living room, the one with the slightly warped drawer on the right. She opened it. Inside were things only she knew how to read. Handwritten notes, faded coloring pages, a pressed flower from a long-gone spring, and in the center 2 photographs. The first, creased, bent at the corners, showed a boy at 12, arms folded over his chest, half smiling in the shadow of her garden, her arm around him, a flower-streaked apron across her waist, a silent bond frozen in time. The second, newer, sat beside it. Jonas, now grown, stood taller, broader. No hoodie, no guarded posture, just a soft, real smile. His arm, this time, wasn't tentative. It rested firmly around her shoulders. They stood in front of the very courthouse where everything had shifted, where silence had given way to truth, where he'd called her mom. Evelyn stared at the 2 photos for a long time. Then, carefully, she slid the drawer shut. She didn't need to look at them again. Not tonight. Some things, once healed, no longer hurt to remember. She moved to the window and parted the curtains slightly. Outside, the wind rustled the trees gently, like it was humming something just for her. In that moment, Evelyn didn't need the world to know her name. She didn't need applause or headlines or gratitude. She had something stronger. Legacy. Not the kind etched in buildings or shouted from stages, but the kind planted quietly, watered over years, and bloomed in the heart of one child who had once been lost. And now, wasn't. What would you have done if you were in Evelyn's shoes? Would you wait quietly for someone who might never come back? Or do you believe that love, when it's real, always finds its way? Let me know in the comments below. I read every one of them. And if this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Because sometimes, the quietest stories echo the loudest.